When a struggling anti-Trump student walked into the parking lot that morning, she never could have imagined that the keys to a brand new truck and a life-changing gift had come from the most unexpected classmate. At the most prestigious New York business school, where privilege and old money ruled the halls, Barron Trump just proved that kindness knows no political boundaries. But before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Now picture this. Grace stands frozen, staring at the brand new Chevrolet Silverado in front of her. Her hands tremble as she reads the note tucked under the windshield wiper. Don't give up on your dreams. Use this to keep going. For your mom, for your future. The truck's emerald paint gleams under the morning sun, but what truly takes her breath away is what she finds inside. In the glove compartment, an envelope, thick with cash, enough to cover her mother's medical bills and wipe away her crushing student debt. But what makes this moment truly extraordinary isn't just Barron's incredible gesture. It's the fact that Grace was a member of one of the most vocal anti-Trump student groups on campus. Unlike her peers, though, she never joined their angry chants or participated in protests. She'd simply sit quietly during meetings, and when she passed Barron in their shared classes, she gave him the same polite nod she gave everyone else. What Grace didn't know was that Barron had been noticing things too. Her exhausted eyes after long commutes, the worn-out shoes she carefully maintained, and the phone calls she tried to hide when her mother's medical bills came due. And what he decided to do about it would shake the foundations of everything everyone on campus thought they knew about politics, privilege, and the true meaning of compassion. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, Grace knew the value of hard work. Her mother, a retired school teacher, had raised her alone after Grace's father passed away when she was just 6. They didn't have much, but they had each other, and her mother made sure Grace never gave up on her dreams. When Grace got accepted to this prestigious business school on a partial scholarship, it seemed like all those late nights studying had finally paid off. She was the first person from her high school to ever get into such a prestigious university. The whole town celebrated. Bake sales, car washes, anything to help her make it to New York. But life has a way of testing our faith. Just 2 months before Grace was set to start at the university, her mother was diagnosed with stage 3 cancer. The doctors were hopeful, but the treatment costs were astronomical. Grace considered declining her admission, but her mother wouldn't hear of it. God didn't bring you this far to leave you here, she'd say, fighting back tears. So Grace found herself living on the outskirts of New York, sharing a tiny apartment with 3 other students, taking a 2-hour commute each way to campus. Between classes, she'd work at a coffee shop, sending every extra dollar home for her mother's treatment. Her student loans barely covered tuition, and each month brought new medical bills that seemed impossible to pay. Being at a university where most students drove luxury cars and wore designer clothes, Grace felt like an outsider. That's when she discovered the campus political groups. In a world where she felt invisible, they at least offered a sense of community. She chose the anti-Trump group, though something about their anger always made her uncomfortable. But in a place where everyone seemed to belong somewhere, could she afford to belong nowhere? Little did she know that her quiet struggle hadn't gone unnoticed. In fact, someone had been watching her with growing concern. Someone whose act of kindness would soon turn her world upside down and challenge everything she thought she knew about the Trump family. Life at the university wasn't anything like Grace had imagined. Each morning started at 4:30 a.m., catching the first train from New Jersey to make it to her 8 a.m. class. The train rides were her study hall, textbooks balanced on her lap, highlighting important passages while trying not to fall asleep. Some days, she'd have to choose between buying lunch or saving that money for her mother's medication. The contrast between her reality and her classmates' lives was stark. While others complained about their favorite restaurants being fully booked, Grace would quietly eat her packed sandwich in the library, using that time to catch up on assignments. Her worn shoes and simple clothes stood out in a sea of Gucci and Prada, but she held her head high, remembering her mother's words about dignity being worth more than designer labels. During advanced economics, she'd often notice Barron Trump sitting a few rows ahead. Unlike what the anti-Trump group claimed, he wasn't arrogant or showy. He took notes diligently, helped other students when they struggled, and never flaunted his family name. Sometimes their eyes would meet, and he'd give a small, understanding smile. the kind that made Grace wonder if he saw right through her carefully maintained facade. The anti-Trump group met every Thursday in the student center. Grace would sit in the back, nodding along, but never joining the heated discussions. She noticed how they lowered their voices when talking about Barron, sharing gossip and making assumptions about him. Something about their words felt hollow, especially when she'd see him the next day, quietly helping a struggling classmate understand a difficult concept. But everything changed that rainy Tuesday morning. Grace had just gotten off another draining phone call with the hospital's billing department. Her mother's latest treatment had depleted their emergency fund, and the next round was starting soon. As she wiped away tears in the empty classroom, she didn't notice Barron walking past the door. Didn't see him pause, his face filled with concern, as he overheard her desperate conversation. That evening, as Grace prepared for another long commute home, she had no idea that Barron Trump was about to set in motion something that would change not just her life, but the very essence of what everyone there thought they knew about wealth, privilege, and the true nature of compassion. Barron noticed Grace during their first shared class, not because she was part of the anti-Trump group, he was used to that by now, but because of how different she seemed from the others. While they shouted slogans, she remained quiet. While they glared at him, she simply focused on her studies. But what really caught his attention were the signs that most people missed. Her shoes, carefully polished but wearing thin. The way she'd save half her coffee for afternoon classes to avoid buying another one. How she'd sometimes doze off during morning lectures, exhausted from what he later learned was a grueling commute. Small details that painted a picture of silent struggle. That rainy Tuesday changed everything. Barron was heading to the library when he overheard Grace's phone call with the hospital. Her voice, usually composed, was breaking as she begged for more time to pay her mother's medical bills. Something in her tone reminded him of his own mother's words about responsibility and compassion in this world. Melania had told him, "People will judge you before they know you, but true character isn't about who people think you are. It's about what you do when no one's looking." That evening, Barron made some calls. First to the dealership about the Silverado he'd noticed and greatly admired during class breaks. Then to his bank, arranging for the funds her mother needed. Not because he wanted recognition, not because he wanted to prove anything to his critics, but because he believed that when you have the power to help someone, you have the responsibility to do so. As he wrote the note to accompany his gift, Barron thought about how his action might be misinterpreted. Some would call it showing off. Others would search for political motives. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that somewhere in Ohio, a mother would get her treatment, and her daughter would stop having to choose between an education and her mother's life. The morning Grace discovered the Silverado would forever be etched in campus history. Standing there in the parking lot, she read the note again and again, her hands shaking. The envelope in the glove compartment contained enough money to cover not just her mother's next round of treatment, but the entire remaining cost of her care. For the first time in months, Grace felt like she could breathe. No more choosing between textbooks and medical bills. No more 2-hour commutes on crowded trains. No more lying to her mother about having enough to eat. The weight of constant worry lifted from her shoulders, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The morning Grace discovered the Silverado would forever be etched in campus history. Standing there in the parking lot, she read the note again and again, her hands shaking. The envelope in the glove compartment contained enough money to cover not just her mother's next round of treatment, but the entire remaining cost of her care. For the first time in months, Grace felt like she could breathe. No more choosing between textbooks and medical bills. No more 2-hour commutes on crowded trains. No more lying to her mother about having enough to eat. The weight of constant worry lifted from her shoulders, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But it wasn't just about the money or the truck. It was about being seen. Someone had noticed her struggle, understood her pain, and reached out with exactly what she needed. And that someone was Barron Trump, the very person her political group spent so much time criticizing. Grace sat in the driver's seat of her new truck, tears streaming down her face as she called her mother. "Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking, "you're going to get better. We can afford the treatment now." On the other end of the line, her mother began to cry too, asking who their guardian angel was. Grace looked across the parking lot, where Barron was walking to class, head down. Act as if he hadn't just changed someone's entire world, she thought. That evening, as Grace drove home, a trip that now took just 30 minutes instead of 2 hours, she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet kindness she'd witnessed. The same person her group labeled as privileged and out of touch had shown more understanding of her struggles than anyone else. You know what the funny thing is? Grace told a friend as they watched the anti-Trump group's numbers dwindle. They're so busy fighting against what they think wealth and privilege look like that they can't recognize true privilege. The privilege of being able to help others without wanting anything in return. The next morning, Grace found Barron sitting alone in the library's quiet study area. Her heart was pounding as she approached his table, but she knew this conversation needed to happen. "Thank you," she said softly, sliding into the chair across from him. "I don't even know how to begin to express my gratitude." Barron looked up from his textbook, offering that same gentle smile she'd seen in class. "You don't have to thank me, Grace." "But I do," she insisted, her voice trembling slightly. "Not just for the truck and the money, but for seeing me, for understanding." She paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. "I need to confess something." Barron closed his book, giving her his full attention. "I joined that group." Grace's eyes welled with tears. "I was so lost when I came here. Everything was so overwhelming. The wealth, the pressure, my mom's illness. I thought if I joined them, I'd finally belong somewhere." She expected judgment in his eyes, but found only understanding. "You know," Barron replied thoughtfully, "my father always says that the loudest voices often belong to the most insecure people. But it's the quiet ones, the ones who work hard without complaining, who help others without seeking credit. Those are the ones who truly make America great." Grace wiped away a tear. "I left the group yesterday," she continued. "They wanted me to reject your help, to choose their ideology over my mother's life." "And what did you choose?" Barron asked, though his smile suggested he already knew the answer. "I chose truth," Grace replied. "I chose gratitude over grudges. I chose to see people as they are, not as others say they should be." Word of Grace's confrontation with the anti-Trump group spread like wildfire. But unlike the narratives that usually dominated campus politics, this one was different. This was a story about real people, real struggles, and real kindness. Students who had never spoken up before started sharing their own stories. A sophomore who revealed how Barron had tutored him in economics for weeks, refusing any payment. A cafeteria worker who told about the time he'd quietly paid for a student's meal plan when she ran out of funds. Small acts of kindness that had gone unnoticed because they didn't fit the expected narrative. The anti-Trump group tried to spin the story, claiming Grace had been bought off. But their accusations fell flat when Grace's mother arrived on campus for her next treatment, paid for by Barron's gift. The sight of Grace hugging her tearful mother in the parking lot, both of them thanking God for their guardian angel, did more to change hearts than any protest ever could. "You know what the craziest part is?" Grace told a friend as they watched the anti-Trump group's numbers dwindle. "They're so busy fighting against what they think wealth and privilege look like that they can't recognize true privilege. The privilege of being able to help others without wanting anything in return." And as Grace stood at the podium in the university's main auditorium, delivering a speech about the power of kindness and the importance of seeing people for who they truly are, she knew she was exactly where she belonged. Not in any group or camp, but in a place of truth, gratitude, and authentic compassion. What did you think of this story? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts.